Friends, here is the most uncomfortable truth I may ever say on this channel. The life most people are living, the choices they're making, the person they've become, the way they shrink in certain rooms and perform in others is not their own. It belongs to their parents, their past, their fear of what other people will think. And here's what makes that so devastating. Most people will never realize it. They'll spend an entire lifetime managing other people's opinions of them, carrying guilt for things that were never their fault, blaming a past they can't change, and never once ask the question, wait, who am I actually living for? This video is built on a book that asks that question, and then answers it in a way that will either offend you or completely set you free. The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro, Kishimi, and Fumitake, Koga. By the end of what you're about to hear, you will understand 3 things that most people never figure out. 1. Why your past, no matter how painful, has zero claim on your present. 2. The one insight that can immediately reduce your anxiety and untangle your most difficult relationships. And 3. What it actually takes to live a life that feels genuinely yours. This is the 30-minute mentor. Let's begin. Introduction: the man behind the ideas. Picture Vienna, 1902. The city is electric with intellectual energy. The coffeehouse culture is in full swing, philosophers, doctors, writers crammed around small tables arguing about the nature of the human mind. And sitting at the center of it all is the most famous psychologist in the world, Sigmund Freud. Freud's big idea: your adult life is essentially a product of your childhood. The unconscious mind, shaped by early experiences, repressed fears, hidden desires, is running the show beneath the surface of everything you do. To heal, you must look backward, dig, excavate, find the wound and name it. It was brilliant, revolutionary, and for nearly a century, the Western world built its entire understanding of psychology on that foundation. But there was another man in Vienna, a colleague of Freud's, at first an admirer, then a dissenter. A man who looked at the same human beings Freud was studying and came to a radically different conclusion. His name was Alfred Adler. Where Freud looked at the past to explain the present, Adler looked at something completely different. He looked at the future, or more specifically, the goals and purposes quietly driving our behavior right now. Not childhood wounds, not repressed desires, not the past. The direction we're moving toward. This single shift, from asking why did this happen to me, to asking what am I trying to accomplish right now, is the philosophical earthquake on which this entire book is built. Now, The Courage to be Disliked was written by 2 Japanese authors, Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. It became a cultural phenomenon in Japan before sweeping across the world, selling millions of copies and earning a reputation as one of the few self-help books that actually challenges you rather than just comforting you. The format is unique. It's written as a dialogue, a conversation across 5 evenings between a young man simply called the youth and an older thinker called the philosopher. The youth is angry, skeptical. He doesn't like himself much and refuses to believe that happiness is actually available to someone like him. The philosopher is patient, still, and completely unshakable in his belief that the youth, that all of us, have everything we need to be free right now in this exact moment. Over 5 nights of conversation, these 2 men wrestle with some of the most fundamental questions in human life. And we're going to walk through every single one of those nights together. Night 1 starts tonight, and it starts with a statement that might just be the most confronting thing you'll hear all year. Night 1, your past has no power over you. The youth arrives at the philosopher's home full of frustration and barely concealed despair. He spent his life feeling inferior. He grew up in the shadow of an older brother, more athletic, more charming, more naturally successful by every conventional measure. He struggled socially. He blushes in public. He goes red whenever he's put on the spot, and that embarrassment has driven him further and further inward, away from the world. He wants the philosopher to confirm what he already suspects, that his life is the product of forces beyond his control, that his genes, his upbringing, his circumstances, these things are the reasons his life looks the way it does. And the philosopher says, no. Not, well, it's complicated. Not, I understand why you feel that way. Just no. The philosopher introduces the youth, and now us, to the foundational concept in Adlerian psychology. Two Greek words: etiology and teleology. Etiology, the study of causes. This is the Freudian model. Your past causes your present. Who you are today is a direct downstream result of what happened to you back then. Trauma in childhood produces dysfunction in adulthood. Cause creates effect. The past writes the future. Teleology, the study of purpose. This is the Adlerian model. Your present is being shaped not by what happened to you, but by the goals you are currently pursuing, often without your conscious awareness. The difference sounds academic, but it's the difference between a prison and an open field. Here's the analogy that makes this crystal clear. Think of your past as a pair of glasses you've been handed. Every experience, every hurt, every failure, every shame has tinted those lenses a particular color. And for most of your life, you've been told, of course you see the world that way. Look at what happened to you. Those glasses make sense. Adler isn't saying the glasses weren't given to you. He's saying you've been wearing them as though you have no choice. And the moment you realize you can take them off, even temporarily, even reluctantly, the entire world looks different. The glasses are real. The choice to keep wearing them, that's also real. Here's the example the philosopher actually uses, and it's a striking one. Imagine someone who can't leave the house, crippling anxiety. Panic attacks every time they approach the front door. Under the Freudian model, you'd look backward, find the childhood trauma, the repressed memory, the root cause. And maybe you'd find something, maybe a neglectful parent, a humiliating experience, a moment that hardwired a fear response. But Adler asks a different question. What does staying home protect this person from? What does the anxiety achieve? Maybe it protects them from failure, from judgment, from the terrifying possibility of putting themselves out there and finding out they're not enough. In Adlerian psychology, the anxiety isn't the cause of the isolation. It's the tool the person is using to avoid something even more frightening. And here's the part that stings. The person isn't consciously manufacturing their anxiety, but their psyche has produced it because some part of them decided it was safer than the alternative. I want to pause here and ask you something genuinely. Is there an area of your life where you've been using a past experience as a reason not to try? A relationship, a career choice, an ambition you've quietly shelved? And if that experience didn't exist, if that chapter of your story were rewritten, would you actually do the thing you've been avoiding? Sit with that, really sit with it. Now the youth pushes back exactly the way you might be pushing back right now. He says, "Are you telling me that people choose to be anxious, choose to be depressed, that their suffering is somehow a decision?" And the philosopher is careful. He's not saying the pain isn't real. He's not dismissing suffering. He's saying something more specific. We cannot choose what happens to us, but we have profound influence over the meaning we assign to what happens and over what we decide to do next. Two people can grow up in the exact same difficult household, same absent parent, same instability, same exposure to pain. One says, "Because of what happened to me, I will never trust anyone again." The other says, "Because of what happened to me, I know what it feels like to be unseen, and I'll spend my life making sure others feel seen." Same history, radically different trajectories. The difference isn't the past. The difference is the story each person chose to build from it. And then the philosopher asks the youth the question that stops him cold. If your past truly determined your present, if there was nothing you could do about it, why are you here talking to me? Why come at all? Why seek out a philosopher? Why read books, watch videos, search for something better if the script is already written? The answer is, because somewhere inside you, you already know the script isn't finished. Because the part of you that's searching is itself the proof that your past doesn't own you. Here is your one action from night one. This week, identify one story you've been telling yourself about why something in your life can't change and write it down. Then write next to it, what goal does this story help me avoid? Not as self-criticism, as curiosity. Because Adler's first gift isn't optimism. It's honesty about the purpose our stories are serving. Let's anchor what night one gave us before we move forward. Your past does not determine your present. Full stop. The lifestyle you have, the way you think, how you respond, who you've become was shaped by choices. Not always conscious choices, but choices, and what was chosen can be rechosen. The question stops being, what happened to me? And starts being, what am I going to do now? Now, if that felt uncomfortable, if some part of you is resisting it, good. Stay with us. Because night 2 is where things get even more confronting. We're about to name the single source of almost all your psychological suffering. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Night 2, every problem has the same root cause. The youth returns the next night with a sharper question. He says, all right, let's say I accept, at least partly, that I'm not a prisoner of my past. Let's say the lifestyle I have is something I chose. Then what is the actual source of my unhappiness? What's making my life feel this small and this painful? The philosopher's answer is one of the most memorable lines in the book. He says it calmly, as though stating the weather. All problems are interpersonal relationship problems. Not most problems, not many, all problems. The youth's reaction is almost exactly yours right now. Disbelief. That sounds too simple, too absolute. What about internal struggles, anxiety, depression, shame, self-doubt? What about financial hardship or illness or grief? The philosopher is patient. He walks through each objection. Even your most internal battles, your low self-worth, your shame, your fear of failure, almost always have another person at their center. You feel inferior compared to someone. You feel ashamed in the eyes of someone. You fear failure because of what other people will think of you. Strip away the social layer from almost any psychological pain and watch what happens to it. And this brings Adler to a concept that most people misunderstand: the inferiority complex. Here's the analogy that unlocks this. Think of the feeling of inferiority like a car engine running rough. It makes noise, it causes discomfort, but it's also telling you something. It's trying to get you moving. In Adler's framework, a basic sense of inferiority is healthy. It's the engine of growth. When we sense a gap between who we are and who we could be, that tension, that friction is fuel. The problem isn't the engine running rough. The problem is when we put a silencer on it, when instead of using that discomfort to move forward, we use it to stop moving entirely. That's when an inferiority feeling becomes an inferiority complex. And the silencer we most commonly use is the superiority complex. Now here's what catches most people completely off guard. The superiority complex isn't confidence. It's not the swagger of someone who genuinely likes themselves. It's the performance of someone who is terrified they're not enough, overcorrecting so loudly that no one will look too closely. It's the person who brags, the person who name drops, the person who needs to have the last word in every conversation, who always has to be the one who's suffered more, tried harder, sacrificed longer. But it also shows up in subtler, more sympathetic forms. Think about the person who constantly tells you how busy they are, how stressed, how overwhelmed. On the surface, they seem like they're venting. But what they're often communicating underneath is, look how important and in demand I am. That busyness is a status claim. The exhaustion is a superiority bid. Or think about the person who leads every conversation with their pain, their history, their wounds. The philosopher calls this using weakness as a weapon. By keeping their suffering visible, they claim a kind of moral authority that makes them harder to challenge, harder to hold accountable, harder to confront. Does any of that land? Here's your question for night 2, and I want you to be really honest. Where in your life are you using weakness, a struggle, a hardship, a difficulty, not to invite genuine connection, but to avoid responsibility or deflect criticism? There's no shame in the question. We've all done it. The courage is in seeing it. Now, here's where the philosopher draws a line that changed everything for the youth, and might change something for you. He says, the antidote to comparison isn't pretending other people don't exist. It's simply changing who you're comparing yourself to. Most people run their entire sense of self-worth against other people, and that game is unwinnable. There will always be someone more successful, more attractive, more talented, more admired. Always. The moment you make your worth comparative, you've condemned yourself to an endless treadmill that never arrives anywhere. Adler's prescription is deceptively simple. Compete only with who you were yesterday. Not against her, not against him, not against the curated version of someone's life on your phone, against your own previous self. Am I a little more honest than last week? A little braver? A little more in alignment with who I want to be? That's the only contest worth entering. Your action from night 2. This week, catch yourself in one moment of social comparison, someone's career, relationship, body, or lifestyle, and the instant you notice it, redirect with this question. What is one thing I'm doing better this week than I was doing last month? One thing specific, yours. Because the moment you move from competing outward to measuring inward, the entire quality of your inner life begins to shift. Night 2 gave us this. Nearly all suffering has an interpersonal root, and the mechanism underneath most of that suffering, whether it shows up as shyness, arrogance, exhaustion, or victimhood, is a misfired inferiority feeling trying to protect us from the terrifying possibility that we might try and still not be enough. The solution isn't to defeat that feeling, it's to redirect it. And Night 3 is where we learn exactly how. What you're about to hear next is the concept that I personally think is the most immediately useful idea in this entire book. People have ended therapy, saved marriages, and quit jobs that were killing them after understanding this one thing. It's called the separation of tasks, and it is going to change how you see every relationship you have. Night 3, the separation of tasks, the key to real freedom. If there is one single idea from this entire book that you carry with you into tomorrow, let it be this. Adler asks a question so simple it almost sounds like a trick. Whose task is this? Every action, every decision, every reaction, every responsibility in life belongs to someone. The separation of tasks is the practice of knowing which ones belong to you and which ones never did. Let me make it concrete. You work hard on a project and deliver your best work. Whether your boss praises it or dismisses it, whose task is that response? It belongs to the boss entirely. You are honest in a relationship, kind, present, genuine. Whether the other person chooses to stay or leave, whose task is that? Theirs. You create something, art, a business, a piece of writing, an idea. Whether the world celebrates it or ignores it, whose task is the reception? The world's. Now here's where it becomes confronting. Think about how much of your daily psychological energy is spent trying to manage things that belong to other people's tasks. You spend 45 minutes rewriting a message because you're afraid of how it'll be read. You hold back your real opinion in a conversation because you can't bear the risk of judgment. You say yes when everything in you is screaming no, because disappointing someone feels like a physical threat. You shrink your real self into a smaller, safer, more manageable version, hoping that version will finally be enough. Here's the analogy that makes the separation of tasks undeniable. Imagine you're a gardener. Your job is to plant the seeds well, choose the right soil, water consistently, give the plant what it needs. But you cannot control the weather. You cannot control the season. You cannot control whether a frost comes or whether the sun cooperates. Most people are trying to control the weather. They're so busy managing the atmosphere, other people's moods, reactions, opinions, that they've stopped tending their own garden. And the garden is dying. The separation of tasks says, plant the seeds with full care, then let go of the weather. The philosopher makes a point here that I want to linger on, because it is both uncomfortable and deeply freeing. He says, when you constantly interfere with other people's tasks, even out of love, you are not respecting them. You are controlling them. If you rush to fix every problem before someone has a chance to wrestle with it, you're sending a quiet message. I don't trust you to handle this. If you walk on eggshells around someone because you're managing their emotional reaction, you're sending a message. Your feelings are more real to me than my own truth. And if you live your entire life trying to guarantee other people's approval, shaping every word, every choice, every presentation of yourself around what you think they want to see, you have handed them your task. You have made their internal weather the condition of your existence. That is not love, that is self-abandonment. Here's your Night 3 question, and this one is worth writing down. Think of your most anxiety-producing relationship right now. Ask yourself, how much of my anxiety comes from trying to control how that person thinks or feels about me? And then ask, what would I do differently in that relationship if I genuinely accepted that their response to me is their task, not mine? Now, the youth raises the exact objection you might be raising. Isn't this just code for not caring, for being selfish, for living without empathy? And the philosopher draws a precise and important line. He's not saying, be reckless, say whatever you want and ignore the fallout, live in a bubble of pure self-interest. He is saying, recognize the difference between considering others and living for others. Consideration is choosing your words with care, noticing when someone is struggling, acting with kindness because you value their well-being. Living for others is making their approval the price of admission to your own life. One is wisdom, one is a slow and unacknowledged form of self-erasure. And here's the twist the philosopher adds that very few people expect. When you live for everyone's approval, you actually stop being genuinely useful to anyone. Because a person with no authentic self, a person who simply reflects back what each person around them wants to see, cannot offer real love, real honesty, real presence. They can only offer a mirror, and mirrors are not the same as people. B-roll, person standing between two groups, facing both directions, slowly disappearing, fading out of the frame. The philosopher puts it plainly. If you are not living your own life, who is going to live it for you? Your action from night 3, and this one is immediate. In the next 24 hours, identify one thing you've been doing or avoiding purely to manage someone else's reaction to you. Then ask, if I were only responsible for my own task here, what would I actually do? You don't have to act on it yet, just see it clearly. Clarity is the beginning. Night 3 in one sentence. You are not responsible for how people respond to you. You are responsible for who you choose to be. Give people back their tasks, and when you do, you will feel something unfamiliar. Lightness. The particular lightness of a person who has stopped trying to run a weather system they were never built to control. Now here's the question Night 3 leaves us with. If I stop living for other people's approval, if I genuinely claim my own tasks and let go of theirs, what exactly am I living for? That's what Night 4 answers. And the answer involves the single most important shift in perspective Adler ever proposed about human happiness. Night 4, you are not the center of the world. By the 4th night, something has changed in the youth. He's still challenging the philosopher, still pushing, but the quality of his resistance has shifted. It's less defensive, more genuinely searching. Like someone who's been walking in the dark and has just caught the first hint of light but isn't quite ready to trust it. He asks what might be his most honest question yet. If I stop living for approval, if I stop making other people the center of my existence, what am I supposed to do with that freedom? And the philosopher introduces a concept that surprised me the first time I heard it, because it sounds like it should be obvious, but somehow isn't. He calls it community feeling. In German, Adler's original language, Gemeinschaftsgefühl, sometimes translated as social interest, but the philosopher prefers a more human translation, belonging. Not being accepted, not being approved of, not being liked. Belonging. Here's the analogy that makes this distinction click. Imagine you're at a party. There are two kinds of guests. The first kind spends the entire evening managing their image. They're monitoring reactions, adjusting what they say based on who's listening, performing the version of themselves they think will land best with this particular crowd. They're at the party, but they're not in it. The second kind of guest walks in and asks themselves, who here might need someone to talk to tonight? They're not performing, they're participating, genuinely, fully. Their attention is outward. At the end of the evening, the first person leaves exhausted and vaguely empty. The second leaves quietly full. The difference is what Adler meant by community feeling, not selflessness in the sacrificial sense, just shifting the center of gravity from how do I appear to how can I contribute. The philosopher is careful to distinguish between two fundamentally different ways of seeking to belong. Being accepted is external. It depends on other people's responses, their moods, their criteria, their current emotional weather. Being accepted is always contingent, always conditional, always one bad day away from being withdrawn. Belonging, the Adlerian kind, is something you create through action, specifically through contribution. When you act in a way that genuinely helps someone, not to get credit, not to be repaid, but because it matters, you feel a connection that belongs to you regardless of how the other person responds. That feeling, I am useful here, my presence is making something better, is what the philosopher calls a true sense of self-worth. Not a feeling given to you by someone else, Not a feeling you earned by being praised or admired or followed or liked. A feeling that is yours always. Here's your Night 4 question. Think about a relationship in your life that feels hollow or transactional. Ask yourself, am I in this relationship trying to receive belonging, or am I trying to create it? Because Adler's insight is this: the people who feel most deeply connected are almost always the ones asking, what can I give here? Not what am I getting? Now, here's where the philosopher says something quietly devastating, and I want to make sure it lands. He suggests that one of the most common barriers to genuine community feeling looks nothing like selfishness. It looks like self-consciousness. The person who is constantly worrying about what others think of them, who is obsessed with their image, their reputation, how they're being perceived, is also profoundly self-centered. Because their attention is on themselves, even when it appears to be on others. The person in the conversation thinking, how do I come across right now, isn't actually in the conversation. They're watching themselves from the outside. The person performing acts of generosity while secretly keeping score, who feels a quiet burn of resentment when the generosity isn't returned, isn't giving. They're investing, and investments come with expectations of return. True contribution is what happens when you stop watching yourself and simply show up, present, unguarded, willing to be seen without managing what the seeing reveals. Your action from Night 4, and this is one of the most quietly powerful things you can do. In your next meaningful interaction, a conversation, a meal, a meeting, ask yourself at the start, what is one way I can make this a little better for the person in front of me? Not for recognition, not as a transaction, just as a choice. Notice how it changes the quality of your presence. Notice how it changes the quality of the connection. Night 4, in essence, your sense of belonging is not something you receive. It is something you generate through genuine contribution. The moment you shift from how do I appear to how can I contribute, something extraordinary happens. The anxiety quiets, the performance stops, and you arrive maybe for the first time in your actual life. We've covered 4 nights now. 4 fundamental shifts in the way you see yourself, your suffering, your relationships, your worth. But everything we've talked about, every idea, every reframe, every liberating possibility, is completely useless without the thing Night 5 gives us. Because knowing the truth and living the truth are very different things, and what stands between them has a very specific name. Night 5 is the one that gives the book its title, and it might be the most important thing you hear today. Night 5, the courage to be disliked. By the 5th and final night, something has shifted between the youth and the philosopher. The youth arrives quieter than before. The sharp, combative edges of his earlier resistance have softened, not because the questions have been answered in the way he expected, but because something deeper than his intellect has been reached. Something that was wound-tight is beginning to loosen. He tells the philosopher, I think I understand what you've been saying, but I'm still afraid. And the philosopher says something so simple it almost disappoints, until it doesn't. He says, yes, and that's exactly right, because what stands between the life you have and the life you're capable of living is not knowledge, it is courage. Specifically, the courage to be disliked. Not the courage to fight something, not the courage to achieve something, the courage to accept something. That some people you care about, people whose opinion you've spent years trying to manage, are going to be disappointed in you when you live authentically. And to do it anyway. Here's the analogy that finally made this real for me, and I hope it does the same for you. Think about a tree in a storm. A tree that's deeply rooted can bend, sometimes dramatically, without breaking. It can withstand enormous force because its foundation is stable. It doesn't need the storm to stop. It doesn't need the weather to cooperate. It simply moves with what comes, returns to itself, and keeps growing. Most of us have been building ourselves like scaffolding instead of trees. We're structures held up by external support, other people's approval, their admiration, their acceptance. And the moment that support shifts, the moment someone withdraws it, we feel like we're falling. The courage to be disliked is the practice of growing roots instead of scaffolding. It means your stability comes from inside, from your own values, your own sense of purpose, your own honest relationship with yourself, not from the weather of other people's opinions. Now here's the line from night 5 that I believe is the most important sentence in this entire book. The philosopher says it quietly, but it carries enormous weight. You are not living to satisfy the expectations of others. Other people are not living to satisfy your expectations. Read both halves of that sentence, because the second half is where most people get ambushed. We're comfortable, at least intellectually, with the idea that we shouldn't live for other people's approval. Most people have heard that message. Many have nodded along to it. But the other direction, other people are not living to satisfy your expectations. That one hits differently. It means the partner who doesn't love you the way you wanted them to isn't failing you. They're living their own life, filtered through their own pain and their own psychology. It means the friend who didn't show up for you in the way you needed wasn't betraying you. They were doing the best they could with what they had, within their own story. And when you truly internalize this, not as a concept, but as a lived reality, something extraordinary happens. The resentment quiets. The scoreboard dissolves. The constant internal accounting of who owes what to whom just stops. And what you're left with is the possibility of genuine connection, not based on what you need from each other, but on who you actually are to each other. This is what the philosopher calls the horizontal relationship. A relationship between equals, not structured by praise and criticism, reward and withdrawal, performance and evaluation. A relationship where two whole people, each responsible for their own tasks, each with an honest relationship with themselves, choose each other freely, repeatedly, without obligation. The opposite what most of us have been taught to navigate is the vertical relationship. Always a hierarchy, always a judge. One person performing, one evaluating, the parent always correcting, the partner always grading, the friend always assessing whether you're measuring up. And here's the part that hurts. Even when we're in the judging position, even when we're the one with the power in a vertical dynamic, we are diminished by it. Because we cannot truly connect with someone we're evaluating. We can't be truly known by someone we're performing for. The horizontal relationship asks something much harder. It asks you to show up as you actually are without guarantee that it will be received well, without the safety of performance, without the safety of managing the other person's response. It asks for the courage to be disliked. And then the philosopher arrives at what he calls the hardest practice of all, living in the here and now. He says most human beings live in one of two places, the past or the future. Either they're lost in regret, if only things had been different, if only I had made different choices, if only that hadn't happened to me. Or they're consumed by anxiety. What if this goes wrong? What if I'm not enough? What if the worst happens? And in moving between those two places, they miss the only moment they actually exist in. This isn't just a mindfulness cliché. Adler frames it in a specific and urgent way. He says the life lie, the story that keeps real living perpetually out of reach, usually sounds like, once I fix this thing about myself, then I'll start. Once I'm more confident, once I'm more established, once I'm less afraid, once I'm more worthy, then I'll begin. But the beginning never comes, because the condition is always moving, because the real function of that story is not to motivate preparation, it's to avoid the vulnerability of actually showing up. What Adler proposes instead is something almost startlingly simple. Treat the current moment as the destination. Not to abandon growth, not to stop caring about the future, but to recognize that the meaning of your life is not held hostage in some future achievement. It is available right now in the quality of attention you bring to this moment, this relationship, this ordinary Tuesday. A life well lived is not the sum of its peaks. It's the accumulation of real, present, honest moments that added up to something that mattered. Here's your final reflective question, and it might be the most important one of the whole video. If you knew with complete certainty that the most important person in your life would love you and respect you no less for being exactly who you actually are, what would you do differently tomorrow? Hold that answer gently, because it's pointing at the life that's waiting for you. Your action from night 5. Choose one area of your life where you've been performing, where the version of you that shows up is curated, carefully managed, shaped around what you think someone needs to see. And this week, in one small, specific moment in that area, be honest instead. Not dramatically, not as a declaration, just quietly, clearly yourself. Notice what happens, not to their reaction, to you. Night 5 brought us home to this. Everything Adler offers, the rejection of trauma as destiny, the interpersonal root of suffering, the separation of tasks, the meaning of true belonging, all of it requires a single thing to actually function in your real life. Courage specifically, the courage to be disliked. To be yourself, knowing that not everyone will celebrate it. To make choices rooted in your genuine values, knowing that some people will disapprove. To live in the present fully, without the protective distance of performance. That courage is not comfortable, but it is the entry point to a life that actually belongs to you. Final lesson, what true freedom actually costs. As the 5th night ends, the youth stands to leave, and he says something that I think speaks for every single person who has ever read this book. I know you're right, but I'm not ready. And the philosopher, patient, steady, unshifted, says simply, that is fine, you can come back whenever you are. There's something important in that exchange that's easy to miss. The philosopher doesn't push, doesn't persuade, doesn't make the youth feel guilty for needing more time. Because what Adlerian psychology offers is not a quick fix. It's not a 5-step hack or a morning routine or a mindset shift you can download in a weekend. It is an honest reckoning with something that most of us have been avoiding for years, possibly our whole lives. The question of whether we are actually living or just managing the appearance of living. And that reckoning takes courage, the slow, daily, unglamorous kind. The courage to say what you mean and bear the discomfort of how it lands. The courage to own your choices without hiding behind your history. The courage to draw a boundary and hold it even when someone you love calls it selfish. The courage to show up as yourself, visibly, vulnerably, unpolished, and trust that the right people will recognize you. The courage to be disliked. What Adler ultimately promises is not the shallow happiness of constant approval and zero conflict. He promises something the Greeks called eudaimonia, a word that doesn't translate perfectly into English but gets closest to this, human flourishing. The deep, quiet, sustaining sense that you are living in alignment with who you truly are. Not performing, not managing, not waiting until conditions improve. Living. And here is perhaps the most radical thing Adler ever said, and the thing this book leaves ringing in your ears long after the last page. This life is available to you, right now, not when you're fixed enough, not when you've healed enough or succeeded enough or been loved enough by enough people. Now, the only question that matters, is whether you have the courage to claim it. Conclusion, recap, and call to action. Let's bring all 5 nights home. Night 1 gave us this: your past does not determine your present. The lifestyle you live was chosen, and what was chosen can be rechosen. You are not a product of what happened to you. You are the author of the story you're choosing to tell from it. Night 2 told us, almost all psychological suffering has an interpersonal root. The inferiority feeling that was meant to fuel your growth has, for most of us, been misdirected into comparison, performance, or victimhood. The fix is to stop competing outward and start measuring only against who you were yesterday. Night 3 handed us the most practical tool in the book: separate your tasks from other people's. You are responsible for your honesty, your choices, your actions. What they make of those is entirely, fully, irreversibly theirs. Give it back. Night 4 showed us that genuine belonging, not approval, not being liked, but real, sustaining belonging, comes from contribution. From shifting the question from how do I appear to how can I be useful. That shift changes everything about how you feel in a room. And Night 5 gave us the courage to actually live all of it. The courage to be disliked, to be yourself without guarantee, to exist in the present without the protective delay of once things are better, to build roots instead of scaffolding. Before you leave, here's your specific question for the comments. Think about one relationship in your life, just one, where you've been trying to control the other person's reaction to you. What's one thing you would do differently if you fully accepted that their response is their task, not yours? Drop it below, because I genuinely believe that naming it, even just in a comment section, even anonymously, is one small act of the courage this book is asking us to practice. If this conversation opened something in you, if even one idea shifted slightly, please like this video and share it. These ideas are genuinely rare. The people in your life who need them may not know to search for them. And if you're new here, the 30-Minute Mentor is where we take the books, philosophies, and frameworks that genuinely change how people see their lives and bring them to you with the depth and honesty they deserve. Subscribe, come back next week. We have more conversations exactly like this one. Until then, take good care of yourself. And remember, freedom isn't something you eventually earn. It's something you have to be brave enough to choose. Right now,